Okay, so now I am going to use a calculator to do the stuff from section 1.3. And this may be a bit irritating to you because you may say, well, why in the world didn't we do this before? As opposed to in the last couple of videos, we've been doing everything by hand. And you can always use your calculator in the exam, by the way. So why do we do it by hand? Well, I think doing it by hand initially helps you understand conceptually what these things are. So I think it's important to get a little bit of practice. And once you feel like you understand how to use, these formulas and to do these things by hand, then it's quick just to use a calculator like this. I'm going to use a TI-84, okay? 84, and it could look like this, or maybe it looks like this, or maybe it looks like this. So I'm going to use, and so there's any version of the 84 that works, and I'll look at a couple of these. I'm going to use this one. This one says TI Inspire, but it has an 84 faceplate, and this is one I've checked out to, some people. And so anyway, so I'm going to use this one, but your operating system in here is very similar, pretty much the same thing. And so we have a list of quantitative data, and we want to find the summary stats. And so it's a simple thing to do with your calculator. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn it on. So we hit the on button, and that turns it on. Okay. And so now we've got to enter this data into a list. Okay, that's the first thing we have to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit our favorite button, which is the stat button. So we hit stat, and then we hit enter on edit. The enter button is right there in the lower right. Okay, and so then it takes us to list one, and I'm going to enter these values in list one. By the way, if there was other data had been in there, you want to clear it out. So let's say there just been some other data in here. What you want to do to clear that out is you want to scroll to the top using the arrow keys, go to the top and hit the clear button. Do not hit delete here, because if you hit delete, it'll delete your whole list, which is kind of a problem. And you can bring it back to me and I'll fix it. Well, actually, that's even more of a problem now since you're not in the same building as I am, but you could bring it up to the school and I can meet you in the parking lot and fix it. But the best plan is to not hit delete, hit clear and down arrow, or clear and enter, and that'll do it. So that's how you clear it. Now let's enter this stuff in list one. So I'll just enter the data in list one. 2, 5, 1, 9, 12, 4, 7, 3, 14, and 8. And you notice we're in the command line here, list 111, and so that tells me there's 10 numbers. That's the 10th place. And you always want to check this right quick. And so I believe I did it right. 12, 9, okay, 1, 5. Good. All right, so to get our summary stats, all we've got to do is we're going to hit the stat button again. So we go stat, and then we arrow over to calculate. And we're going to do one variable stats right there. We'll never use two variable stats, and we'll never use that third option either. But in this chapter, it's just that first option, one variable stats. So I hit enter on one variable stats. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take one variable stats of list one. Now, by the way, a couple of the other versions, this other thing comes up, and I'll deal with that in a second. All right. But on this one, I want to do one variable stats of list one. So list one is right above the one button. So the way that you put list one right here is to go hit second and then the one button, second, one, and that puts a list one right there. And then you just hit enter and you have your summary stats. X bar is the mean. So that's our mean. Okay, we'll never use that sigma. That's just the sum of the x's and the sum of the x squares. We won't use that. And then that S is the standard deviation. Okay, that's our standard deviation. And so sigma is another version of the standard deviation. It is a population standard deviation, which we're really not going to use this year. We always use the sample standard deviation, or S. So always use that one. Then if you scroll down, you'll see your 5-number summary. You've got your min, you got your max, you've got your Q1, your median, and your Q3. Okay, and of course your IQR would just be 9 minus 3, which is 6. And so that's a really quick way to find your summary stats. Certainly the standard deviation. So and so there you go. That's how you use the calculator to find your summary stats. Let me show you how it looks with the newer version. So with the newer version, what you do, I put the same thing, I go, to enter the data, just hit stat and edit, and I put the data in list one, and then you go stat and calculate one variable stats, and then this screen will pop up. Now, let's pretend that nothing was there. So you do second, hit the 1 button, list 1. In your frequency list, it needs to be blank or have a 1 in it. And that's going to be true all year, except for this one special little problem in probability. But for the rest of the year, we want to clear this and leave it blank or put a 1 there. But let's just clear it. And so then that's one of the most common errors is people have something else aside from 1 in their frequency list. Don't do that, okay? So then you hit calculate, and then there you go. And then there's your summary stats. And so that's certainly a lot quicker than, doing all that stuff we did in the last video. All right, and then let me show you how to do graphs. So let's say if you wanted to make a box plot. So what you could do is this. Our stat plots are right up there above the y is equal to. So if you wanted to graph this data, you could do second stat plot, and then here's all my plots. Now you notice all these plots are turned off. That's good, okay? One error that could occur is if you have more than one plot, turned on at the same time, except in this, if we're doing another weird kind of problem. But for right now, we're just gonna hit enter on plot 1, okay? And then we hit enter on to turn it on. And then there's 6 kinds of graphs that we have here that we can use with this calculator. So this first graph is a scatter plot. We'll do that in chapter 3. We'll never use that. There's a histogram, which we're going to do in a minute. That is what we call a modified box plot that shows the outliers. That is a regular box plot. And then that's what we call a normal probability plot. And that's going to be in chapter 3 as well. But for right now, we are going to let's go to the regular box plot. And I hit enter. All right, and then my data is in list 1. If it didn't say list 1 there, I would just do second list 1. And now we're ready to graph it. But one of the things you got to be careful about is we don't want anything in the y is equal to. So that will mess up my graph. So what we'll do is we're going to hit the y is equal to, well, I need to quit out of this. I'm sorry. Second, quit. And you hit y is equal to. Now, notice there's nothing in there. If there's anything in there, I would just delete it, or I would, clear it. Notice the plot 1 is highlighted. That means I turn plot 1 on. So now I can just hit the graph button. So I hit the graph button. Now, the next thing you need to do is we want to zoom it to where we can see the whole thing because we can't see the whole thing. So anytime you do a graph with this calculator, you always do zoom 9. Zoom and then 9, just hit the 9 button. That's zoom stat. If you were to scroll down, it'd be 9. So you can just hit the 9 button, zoom stat. That's what you're going to do every time. There it is. And there's a box plot. And now, of course, if you were to draw this, if you're asked to graph a box plot, don't just say you did it on your calculator. You have to draw it on your paper, okay? And so we need to know the scaling. We need to know what these numbers are. And of course, on a box plot, that's the minimum, Q1, the median, Q3, and the max. So to see what they are, hit the trace button. So if you hit trace and notice the little bleeping dot there, that's the median. That's the median. If you scroll to the right, hit the right arrow, that next one is 9, that's Q3, and then the next one is the max, and that allows you to see those. And that's how you do a box plot. Now, the other thing, let me show you how to do a modified box plot. Now, a modified box plot, what it's going to do, so I went back to stat plot and hit that. That is this graph. Now, what that is going to do, and the modified box plot is the quickest way to identify outliers. It will put outliers as dots on the outside, and then it will have the whisker go up to the biggest point that is not an outlier. So now in this case, there is no outliers, and so when we graph that, it's just going to be the same graph. But let's pretend we had an outlier. So let's change this data set, stat and edit, and let's say as opposed to 14, let's say this is like 24. I bet that'll be an outlier. So I've changed that to 24. All right, so now if we hit the graph button, well, it's not big enough to be an outlier, I'm sorry. So let's make that stat and edit. Let's make this like, let's say 32, like that. All right, so 32. Now, if we get graph, well, I'm sorry, I need to go back up here and do this. So plot 1 and, okay. And so that's turned on. So if I do graph and zoom 9, so there. And so there you notice that outlier. And if we hit trace, we can see what it is. I just had to redo the graph there, sorry. So there. So that's a modified box plot that allows you to see the outlier. So the quickest way, if you have a data set, to tell whether or not it has an outlier is do a modified box plot with your calculator and see if it plots it like that. And then I want to show you how to do this with do a histogram with this, which is what we did in section 1.2. So to make a histogram, so you go second stat plot, and then you hit enter, and you would scroll over here to go histogram of list 1, the frequency. You can have it be 1 or leave it blank. Then just hit graph, and then go zoom 9. Zoom 9. And there you go. There's your histogram. And if you hit trace, it'll allow you to see what your scaling is. And so that's saying there's 7 values between 1 and 8.75, 2 values between 8.75 and 16.5. And we have a gap here, and then 1 value between 32 and 39.5. And so that's it. That is basically what you need to know in regards to using your calculator in regards to chapter 1. So if you have any questions about that, please let me know.